evening, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiegue, today live on Friday, May 17th, to wrap up the week. There's been a lot of good NFL stories. I got a couple more on today's episode to talk about with you guys, starting off through the rundown of a few of the topics. We're going to start off continuing on with the ranking series, the positional ranking series that I started yesterday with the NFC North quarterbacks. Now I'll go into the NFC quarterbacks and how I have them ranked. Then later on, we're going to talk about Tua Tagovailoa. Probably not going to show up to the team practices starting next Monday. Contract negotiations going on seem to be the reason behind that. I'll go more into detail into that situation a little bit later in the show. Then we're going to also talk about some of the international games that are on the NFL slate after the release of the entire NFL schedule. We're going to go through all of them and talk about some of the storylines with each of those games. A lot of good stuff to talk about on today's show, so please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. And also, just before I start, I want to remind you guys, if you have any questions or comments you want to make, please make sure to use the tip and donations link you see on your screen, gsmcpodcast.net. By using that link, I can see your questions or comments pop up in the chat box. I'll read it on air, and that way get your guys' perspective or point of view on anything I say or any of the topics we talk about on today's episode. It's a massive help for the show and also all the other shows across the network. So please, again, use the tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net. In saying that, we could get into the positional rankings, this time in the NFC East, with the quarterbacks continuing on our quest through the divisions. Like I mentioned before, yesterday I did the NFC North. Now we'll dive into the NFC East, starting from the worst, going all the way up to number 1. Jayden Daniels slots in there at number 4 for me. And also, just as a reminder, if you don't know how I'm doing these rankings, based on talent, obviously, being the guy to win games rather than just contributing to games, having that persona about you, the accomplishments you've had, and also the amount of success you have with the suitable pieces around you, the rest of the supporting cast around you as well. So that's where Jayden Daniels fits in for me. Based on the criteria, he has to be number 4 for me because obviously he is a rookie, no real experience tape in the NFL. So that's why he slots in at number 4. But also, in saying that, talent-wise and what he can bring to the Washington Commanders, I think would rival any of the quarterbacks in the NFC East, just based on the sort of excitement, arm talent, the X-factor sort of ability to make plays out of nothing, that special magic that some quarterbacks have in the NFL that others don't. I think he's very capable of that. He won the Heisman this past season, so all of that I expect him to bring to the Washington Commanders. And also, unlike Caleb Williams, he hasn't officially been named the starter for the Washington Commanders, at least from what I've seen. So that's why I have him in at number 4. I like what they've done around him, building around him with bringing in Austin Eckler and some other pieces on the offensive line and on the defensive side of the ball as well. So I like what the Washington Commanders are doing. Jayden Daniels, I'm very fond of him. I'm a big fan of him, of what he can do on his own. But the lack of experience has him in at number 4 for me. So that's where we'll start. And then just moving on with the rest of our list. At the number 3 spot, I have Daniel Jones in here for me. Quarterback for the New York Giants. Coming off a pretty bad season, but just the inconsistency factor is the biggest thing for me. You know, you have the injuries, that's one thing. The doubts about if he's going to be healthy for a full 17 games. He struggled with a neck injury, then the devastating ACL injury that really just derailed everything for the New York Giants. As maybe poor of a quarterback that some people want to describe Daniel Jones as. He is the starting quarterback, so once he goes down, you know, there's not really much this team can do. They did play well in some games with Tyrod Taylor, but then again, once your quarterback goes down, you know, a lot of seasons just get thrown in the bin. So that is that with him. You saw some flashes with him in Brian Dable's first year. They made it to the playoffs. They beat the Minnesota Vikings. But then you have the rough year the year after that. And still Daniel Jones is struggling with being out there on the field is one thing, but also when he's out there, the team hasn't looked that much better once he's out there. And then again, you could also say it is the supporting cast around them. They haven't given him a fair chance with that. And with the receivers around him, the O-line is still in question. Saquon's now gone. The decision to move him on is one that I'm still confused about, but it is what it is now. They keep Daniel Jones, gave him that massive contract, and although it is just inconsistency, really the majority with Daniel Jones, and athletically, he sort of fits the part. You know, he's a great runner. I think a lot of people don't know that about him, but arm talent-wise, the decision-making and just making those big game throws, I think that's lacking in some aspects for Daniel Jones as well. So he'll slot in at number 3 for me. And also just one thing I want to bring up with Daniel Jones also, it is just amazing what the expectations will do, where you're drafted, and how people talk about you. You know, Daniel Jones, I think now we get a very clear picture that he probably shouldn't have been picked at the number 6 overall spot in the draft. And could you just imagine if he was drafted in the 3rd round, 2nd round? The level of expectations people would have for him would be obviously dimmed down, and people wouldn't critique him as hard, I believe. But because he was that 1st round pick, because he was deemed to be the guy, a lot more heat falls on him. And I think it's just crazy that a lot of people forget about that this is more sort of, if you look at it, the Giants' sort of mistake for drafting him that high. They could have probably gotten him later on, and then people wouldn't be so hard on the Giants, so hard on Daniel Jones for the up and down performances, because nobody expected that of him. But because he was drafted so high, really in fault for the Giants for drafting him so high, people come down on him a lot more. I just thought that was interesting, and how people change their perspective of a player based on their draft pick and expectations. You know, it comes with it. It's something you can't really determine as a player, but that is just something I wanted to point out. But moving on to the number 2 spot, it got a little technical, I guess, really pulling hairs here with my number 2. Dak Prescott I have in here as my number 2 quarterback for a few reasons, just going based on the criteria I have set. You know, he is a great quarterback. I want to put that out there. You know, he's coming off probably the best season that he's had. Finished top 3 in a lot of statistical categories. 3rd in passing yards, over 4,500. 36 touchdowns, passing touchdowns to lead the league. 69.5 completion percentage, also 1st in the NFL, and had a QBR rating of 72.7, which was also number 2 in the NFL, just behind Brock Purdy. So statistically, the best year in his career as a professional football player. Again, they made it to the playoffs. They had a very impressive record, but that's where the sort of argument kind of derails Dak Prescott. Getting over that hump, the accomplishments, not having the level of success that is worthy of having all those great pieces around them. You know, you have the great O-line, a fantastic defense, a number 1 receiver. Running back could be suspect depending on how you feel about Tony Pollard or Zeke or any of the running backs that they've had. But overall, I think a lot of teams would kill for that sort of talent. It is just a bug, a curse, if you will, that has followed the Dallas Cowboys for a while. And just not getting over that kind of hurts his case for being the number 1 quarterback in this division, in my opinion, just because, alluding to my number 1, obviously there's only one left. He has gotten there. They have had more success team-wise, and he's played a bigger role in that, which is why Dak sort of falls back, because athletically and arm talent-wise, I think he compares to any of the other quarterbacks as well, and probably is right up there with Jalen Hurts. But again, the team success, the accomplishment, and not fulfilling what you're expected to with that sort of team that you have, I think derails him a little bit and just holds him off that number 1 spot for the time being. But obviously, Jalen Hurts is my number 1 quarterback, and he fits the role of what anybody would want in a number 1 quarterback. You know, he's massive, he can run the ball, he has a good arm. The decision making is questionable at times, I will admit, but with the team success that they have recently back in 2022, similar to Dak Prescott, they usually get to the playoffs with that level of talent that they have on both sides of the ball. And once he got there in 2022, they steamrolled pretty much everybody, made it to the Super Bowl. And in the Super Bowl, it's not like Jalen Hurts sort of shrunk to Patrick Mahomes. He went toe-to-toe with him, and really, it was his fault that he had that turnover just before the half. But other than that, I don't know if anybody could have determined who was going to win that game. The way that it was going back and forth, both teams were scoring, both quarterbacks were making plays. And I know he has a lot of talent to work with, but again, similar to Dak Prescott, he has gotten further in the playoffs, at least in recent memory. Even last year, they started 10-1 and they finished very badly, but again, that shows some merit to what Jalen Hurts can do. And also, he has that running ability. He is built similarly to Dak Prescott, but I think Jalen is built more like an athletic running back almost, and he could run a lot more and can just defer to his running ability, which is a trait that not a lot of quarterbacks in general in the NFL can do. So that puts him at my number one spot for me. And also just as a sort of teller, as a precursor to this upcoming season, he is my number one for now, but I think it will be a lot harder to keep him there this coming season now that they have Saquon Barkley in there. If they don't at least, I guess probably make the NFC Championship game or the divisional round at the very least, and that's still at a maybe, I think teams around the league and just critics around the league, analysts or whatnot, would start to look at Jalen Hurts very differently if this year they don't make it as far as they did or close to in 2022. I guess you kind of give him a pass last year because of all the off-the-field coordinators and stuff like that moving around. But this year, there's really no excuses. You have Vic Fangio in there, Kellen Mond in there as your offensive coordinator. You bring in a great running back, one of the best in the NFL. You still have a great O-line, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith. All the talent is off the charts for Jalen Hurts. If they don't have success this year, people will start to look at him very differently. But for now, I think he's done enough to be my number one quarterback, and I'd love to know what you guys think of this list. As always, leave it in the live chat box or after the show. Leave your comments down below. But that'll allow us to move on to the next segment, or before that, a quick break. And on the other side, we're going to talk about Tua Tagovailoa, expected to miss the team practices starting next week over a contract negotiation dispute. How are those talks going? I will fill you guys in on that after the break, and also looking at the international games this year, and also the Thanksgiving and Black Friday games are on the agenda for today. So a lot more to talk about. Stick around and find out more on those topics in just a few seconds.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows where 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Rolling right along on today's episode and into the second segment on Tua Tagovailoa. Recent reports have been swirling around the NFL that Tua is not expected to participate in the team practices starting next Monday, and up until this point, he has been absent for the majority of the volunteer workouts since they reported back on April 15th, and the majority thought around this whole situation over Tua's absence has been obviously because of the contract negotiations going on between his representatives and the Miami Dolphins. Currently, Tua is set to play 2024 on his fifth-year option. That is worth around $23 million on a one-year temporary sort of deal. The Dolphins picked it up last offseason. Obviously, over all the question marks and still uncertainty around Tua and his health, they picked that up right away. And this absence is sort of out of character for Tua. If you have followed or if you are a Miami Dolphins fan, you would know that in his 4 years there, he has been mostly present for these offseason workouts. And it's not like he's a grizzled veteran that just doesn't feel like he has to be there because of his body or anything like that. He's still obviously very young, and this just boils down to the contract negotiations. Not officially a holdout, but it is the start of one, potentially, if you want to call it that. And looking back on last season, Tua is coming off his best and healthiest season as a professional football player. He made the Pro Bowl for the first time. He played all 17 games for the Dolphins, which is huge, and also had a career high in passing yards, over 4,600, but also had 14 interceptions, which was tied for the fourth most in the NFL, right alongside Patrick Mahomes and Trevor Lawrence there as a reference. So, you have those numbers, but the biggest critique on Tua was his health. Was he able to play all of those games? He had a couple surgeries and injuries at the end of his college career, and then you had the concussions once he got into the NFL. And the Dolphins and a lot of people were really unsure on if he would ever be healthy enough to play that. He fixed that in the last offseason, and he came in really determined and more motivated than ever, and sort of hushed the critics a little bit by playing all 17 games, and not only playing them, but performing very well. Early on, he was in those early whispers around the MVP conversation. Maybe not a true contender, but the way he was playing, the pace that he was on in the first 4 weeks of the NFL, he sort of got those looks a little bit, those nods into the MVP conversation. So I think that just shows his growth, and maybe projecting into the future, that's a determination that the Dolphins have to make. Do they believe he can continue this on for consecutive seasons over and over again to be paid like some of the best quarterbacks in the NFL? Because if you look at the extensions that have just recently been dished out, none have reset the market, but Jared Goff just got an extension for $53 million per year. That's sort of I think the threshold right now for very good performing quarterbacks. Anybody that resets the market has to be a very generational type of quarterback that is undoubtedly, no one is going to really debate if they're a good quarterback. So like a CJ Stroud, maybe, obviously Patrick, Josh Allen as well. Those sort of quarterbacks, I think those are the ones that will reset the market. And Jared Goff didn't reset it, but he became the second highest paid quarterback in the NFL. Now Tua is sort of following him up in that path. Will he get that amount of money? That is yet to be determined. But the Miami Dolphins general manager, Chris Greer, pointed out right around the draft time that once the draft is past them now, obviously, that they're going to refocus on trying to get Tua that contract extension and take the contract negotiation discussions a bit more serious. And one of the main points he emphasized was that the goal is to have Tua there for the long term. So it seems like it's trending in the right direction. There hasn't been any inclination that, this deal is far from getting done, but it just keeps on getting pushed back more and more. And now Tua's not going to show up to the volunteer practices. So it is developing, but maybe not in the way that maybe a lot of Dolphins fans would want it to develop. But also with that, I mentioned the durability before, now putting that past them a little bit, and how the Dolphins sort of determined this extension with him. It is funny and something worth noting that all the talks are about the extension. All the talks are about how much money he could make now that he's on his fifth-year option. But the Dolphins still have that franchise tag option available to them for 2025. If they really can't come to terms with Tua and figuring out a number that they like, they could franchise tag him for the 2025 season. But the downside to that is it will cost them about $40 million or more in 2025 for that one-year temporary deal. So, again, there are some risks. There are some benefits keeping him around a lot longer to really determine if he's your guy. So, there's good and bad with that, but it is another option that they have. But also, the question now arises about the other players that the Dolphins have to worry about on potential extensions or expiring contracts. They already picked up the fifth-year options on their star pass rusher, Jalen Phillips, who was having a great year last year before he tore his Achilles, and also their superstar wide receiver, Jalen Waddle, also had his fifth-year option picked up on his deal, and another great player on their defense, Jayden Holland, is in the final year of his rookie deal, and because he was a second-round pick, he doesn't have that luxury fifth-year option that the Dolphins can pick up. So he's playing now in the last year of his rookie deal. So that's three starters right there that the Dolphins also have to keep in the back of their mind to potentially extend. And there is just decisions to be made right now. It's not like they're pushed up against the clock here, but it's similar to, I guess, the Cowboys in a sense that they have these guys that are in need of extension, and you don't want to push it back too far where you're now scrambling to determine who you sacrifice or anything like that. But say Tua Tagovailoa goes further into this mini holdout, he starts not showing up into training camp. That obviously has a fine to go along with it, but a sort of good sign that is based off of that report of being fined for missing training camp practice. Sources close to the Miami Dolphins said that the fine for missing training camp practices is about $40,000, but that could be reduced or waived altogether for Tua Tagovailoa by the Miami Dolphins. So the fact that they're willing to reduce it or just completely wipe it away from Tua, I think is a good sign to show that they really want him around. If they didn't, they would have no problem finding him and no problem sort of having this mindset of not caring. If he's not at training camp, they obviously want him to be there, and not finding him, I think, pushes him more in a positive light that, hey, these guys are doing me a favor. They obviously want me around. And I truly believe that they want him to stay, but extending him does come with some benefits, and also something I think the Dolphins have to keep in mind just based off of this offseason as well, is that by extending Tua, obviously it would reduce his salary cap hit, and so Miami would have more room to work on other deals like the ones I mentioned before with Jalen Phillips and Jalen Waddle and Jayden Holland. If they come to a contract extension with Tua, they'll have more wiggle room there with the salary cap, and also this past offseason is a great example of what could happen, of what they'd have to maybe deal with if they don't figure out their cap situation by extending Tua. They lost their star pass rusher Christian Wilkins and one of their best offensive linemen in Robert Hunt because they were pushed up against the salary cap, so you don't want to keep on making those cuts. By extending Tua, kind of a factor, not against, in favor of Tua re-signing would be that it would create that more salary cap space for the Dolphins, so that's a positive. And also, say that they don't extend Tua first, there are some factors that come along with that. Say they extend Jalen Waddle, maybe Jalen Phillips first, or Jayden Holland because he doesn't have a fifth-year option. I think that'll be a very telling sign if the Dolphins were to extend all these other players before their starting quarterback. I think that would say a lot in how they're truly feeling about this extension, on how the development of this is going. If they feel like it's going in a good direction or a bad direction, we'll get to know if they start extending these guys before Tua. That's something to keep in mind. And also, I mentioned the extensions to other quarterbacks. Tua is part of this mini group alongside Dak, Trevor Lawrence, and also Jordan Love a little bit, but he's not extension eligible, or he just became extension eligible. He's not on the final year of his contract yet, but he is also eligible for an extension. So those 3 to 4 guys, are the next sort of wave up, and you have the Cowboys, the Dolphins, and the Jaguars sort of trying to jump on top of each other, trying to get these extensions done first, obviously to save some money and not have their quarterback try and reset the market if they're the last ones to get extended. That's something else to monitor, how all those teams play off of each other as well. And I mentioned Goff before and how he got $53 million per year. Based on the success, Jared Goff has had more success, but just quarterback to quarterback, talent-wise, arm ability, athleticism, is Jared Goff, that much better in terms of money than Tua? I mean, I have my doubts a little bit. I would probably still take Jared Goff, but the discrepancy in how much money they get per year, I don't think it would be that much, just based on the circumstances as well. It really just comes down to the amount of money that the Dolphins and Tua can compromise at, the risk of losing him in free agency next season if you don't franchise tag him, or the year after that, and also, would you be willing to cough up $40 million if you place the franchise tag on Tua with still having the risk of losing him the year after that? If, say, he doesn't play well at all on that franchise tag, you would have wasted $40 million and that franchise tag on Tua and still moved on from him. All these are factors that the Dolphins have to think about. Do they trust Tua to continue this level of play going forward in his career? I think for right now, they don't have to extend him right now in the next 2 months. I think if they wait maybe into the season and then announce it after the bye week or halfway through the year, I think would probably be the most ideal time to buy them those extra weeks to really see if Tua can be that guy for them. You can't wait too long. Obviously, I wouldn't put it off until next season, but if it were me, I would wait a little bit into the season, and if I'm impressed again, if he gets off to another hot start, I would probably pull the trigger and extend him. Now, the money, he would probably have to fall somewhere between 51 and that $54 million mark, around what Jared Goff got. That's just the circumstance with the quarterbacks now. Again, if Tua plays well to start off the year next year, I think it'll merit that. Some people will have their doubts, about Tua still, how his arm talent compares to Jared Goff, or not Jared Goff, Josh Allen, Aaron Rodgers in that division, but that's just how the market works. That's just the circumstances these teams find themselves in, and it'll be interesting to see going forward into the season, but in the meantime, we'll move on with the rest of the show. A few more topics to talk about on today's episode. We're going to go over the international games as well as the Thanksgiving and Black Friday games, plus what the NFL Vice President of Broadcasting said about the Jets and why they got so many primetime games in the first 12 weeks of the NFL season. Stick around to find out more on those topics. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Continuing on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast with the NFL schedule released this past Wednesday, I didn't get a chance to really talk about some of the international games, so I thought I'd come on here and sort of talk about the storylines, what's intriguing about these games, and when they will be played. If you weren't aware, the NFL will be playing a total of 5 international games this season, and not only will they have another country added to that list, a whole new continent they will be visiting in 2024 down in South America in Sao Paulo, Brazil, which is where we'll start on going over the games. Week 1, Friday, September 6th, exclusively on Peacock, the Green Bay Packers will play against the Philadelphia Eagles down in Brazil. The first time the NFL is heading down to South America and really just Brazil, bringing the game, the excitement around it, down there to South America. It is the first Friday night opening weekend game in over 50 years, so that's also something that's pretty monumental for the NFL and how they set up, how weird the schedule is set up this NFL season, with there being games on every day of the week except Tuesday at some point this NFL season. So that's one Friday game. Also, like I mentioned, the first game in South America, and being played at the Corinthians Arena in Sao Paulo, a soccer stadium. The reception is really what I'm focusing in on here for the international game. You sort of know the reaction in London, in Germany, where they have been playing, but now you're bringing it to a whole new audience, a whole really new demographic of people who are just in love with soccer down there, and to bring American football into their stadiums to get it engraved with all the rest of the people. I'm interested to see how many people show up to it, how many people just react to some of the plays that are going on, and how many people just bring a good reception to some things that happen. It is a great game just in terms of the teams that are being brought down there to Brazil. The Packers, the season that they had, playing against the Eagles, adding Saquon Barkley, and the expectations that are on them this season. I think it'll draw in any regular NFL fan in the United States, but also it should do wonders down there when the people in Brazil see the game and see a high level being played by these two teams. I think that'll draw in a very big crowd, and I think they'll be left very impressed by it. They have the star power, like I mentioned, Jordan Love, Jalen Hurts, Saquon, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith. All the star power is there, and also it is a great matchup to start the year, but also how it could implement the playoff race later on and who gets the tiebreaker there potentially if it comes down to that. So I'm looking forward to it on a Friday, the second game of the NFL regular season. Back-to-back games on Thursday with the Chiefs and Ravens, and then you get this game in a whole new continent. I think will be very exciting. Then moving on to the more regular sort of games on the international schedule. The first one in London at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium doesn't come until week 5 on October the 6th at a very early time, 9:30 a.m. The New York Jets against the Minnesota Vikings. The first of 3 London games, the first of 2 at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. And again, intriguing matchup because you have a lot of new pieces on the Jets, a lot of new pieces as well on the Minnesota Vikings, but also the quarterback battle there. Aaron Rodgers playing against a former NFC North rival. In those competitions, Aaron Rodgers is 17-11-1, so favored in this matchup, I'm sure, but the last time he played an international game was in 2022, the only time he's played an international game, and he lost that game, so he'll be trying to even the score there by beating a former familiar foe in the Minnesota Vikings. But also from the Vikings side, will J.J. McCarthy be the starter by week 5? Not too far into the regular season, and maybe he gets named the starter right off the bat if he really impresses in camp, but I think the general thought is that Sam Darnold will be the starting quarterback for right now, that sort of bridge guy to ease J.J. McCarthy in. But regardless of that, you have 2 great receivers, Garrett Wilson, Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, Mike Williams also being added to the group. I'm forgetting the New York Giants running back's name. It's going to kill me. I can't remember his name. But also, he had a great year last year. I think how bad it just fell apart for the Jets offense, I think hurt him, but now everyone's healthy. I think he could have Breece Hall, that's what it is. Breece Hall, he'll have a great year with the whole offense being healthy. I'm really looking forward to him. I think he could be an underrated player heading into 2024. So another great matchup there in London. More of a familiar crowd there, but they have a great game to look forward to in week 5. Then, just the week after that, in week 6, October 13th, at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium once again, the Jacksonville Jaguars will play the Chicago Bears. The Jaguars making their usual return to London. It'll be their 12th time playing in London, and the Bears have only played there 2 times internationally, and not since 2019 have they had their last international game. So, a bit of a rare occurrence for the Chicago Bears, but also a new, fresh breath of air because they have a new starting quarterback, Caleb Williams, going up against another number 1 overall pick in Trevor Lawrence. The Jaguars had a very disappointing end to the year last year, so they're sort of going to try and prove themselves all over again with having another great start to the year against the Chicago Bears. And also, How will the Bears look by this point? Not really the middle part of the season, but 6 weeks in, you'd hope that there is some sort of rhythm, momentum starting to build with this young team trying to put all these pieces together. Very good, experienced pieces on their own, but as a whole, how do they look cohesively? And also, the Chicago Bears not really having a tough schedule, but this is a very good game to prove themselves as well against another up and coming team. I think will be a good test for them and Caleb Williams, how well he's performing up until this point. They have the star power yet again, and also the Jaguars are a familiar face there in London. Trevor Lawrence is 3-1 internationally already as a quarterback of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So how they rebound off of that, how different their offense looks without Calvin Ridley, now bringing in a younger receiver, Brian Thomas. How do they integrate their run game? I think will all be fascinating to see how it all plays out. But they will be playing in London yet again against the Chicago Bears. And also, the following week, another international game in London, this time at Wembley Stadium, October 20th for Week 7. Again, the Jacksonville Jaguars stay in London, back-to-back years of the Jaguars staying in London, playing consecutive games there. They became the first NFL team to do that last year in 2023, and last week was their 12th appearance. Now, in Week 7, it'll be their 13th appearance internationally. It'll be the 10th time they've played at Wembley. Against the New England Patriots might not be the most intriguing matchup just because we don't know what the Patriots will look like by this time. Maybe Drake May will be starting. That could be a little more exciting than maybe Jacoby Brissett. No shade towards Jacoby Brissett, but I think people just want to see what they have in Drake May. And if that does happen to be the case, it'll be back-to-back weeks that Trevor Lawrence plays two of the top three picks in this year's draft. So that's another storyline to potentially keep an eye on if it happens. And, it is a good chance to see the new reinvented New England Patriots under Gerard Mayo. New quarterback, new players coming in, how will the defense look, and all that sort of stuff. Week 7, it'll be a good opportunity to see how they've developed in the earlier part of the season, sort of heading towards the middle of the season. What kind of record do they have? Injuries, maybe. The quarterback situation, like I mentioned before. It'll be a good test again against the Jacksonville Jaguars, who it just seems that they are the favorite team in London. So traveling there, how do they react to the travel? A young team going overseas and playing a good team. I want to see also how they embrace that. But overall, there are some things that could potentially happen that could make it more exciting. But that is the Week 7 game. And then to round it off, not until a couple weeks later in Week 10, the New York Giants will play the Carolina Panthers at the Allianz Arena in Munich, Germany on November the 10th, again at 9:30 a.m. May not appeal to the regular fans. The Giants and the Panthers not really considered great contenders for each of their conferences, or in the NFC, I should just say. But in Germany, I think it'll be a hit regardless. If you remember last year, it was played in Frankfurt, Germany. This time it'll be in Munich, but the audience was great last year in that game against the Chiefs and the Miami Dolphins. You saw the crowd, how just energized they were to be there, singing songs, having the chant and everything going. Regardless of the game was good or not, thankfully it was a good game between two very good AFC teams. But I think regardless, those fans, those people were just happy to be there, absorbing the atmosphere of a different sort of sport coming in to their country. Now it'll be in Munich, Germany, at the home of Bayern Munich and their stadium. So I think it'll be still a hit regardless of whether or not the game is good or not. And also with just each of these teams, you have the Carolina Panthers. Bryce Young, how does he look in his second year under a new head coach? Dave Canales, a very young head coach, so how has that all played out? They've added some good pieces. Robert Hunt, Damian Lewis, I want to say, from the Seattle Seahawks as well, to that offensive line. Drafted Jonathan Brooks in the draft as maybe one of their starting running backs as well. They brought in Deontay Johnson. So a lot of new pieces. They're trending in the right direction. But how do they look against the New York Giants as well, who have a lot of questions going into this year? No real star running back to play off of. Will Daniel Jones sort of prove a lot of people wrong? Brian Dable and general manager Joe Shane, are they put under more pressure if they're not performing well by this point in the season? a lot of things to look forward to in this game, regardless if they might not be the most appealing teams. I think it'll still be a good thing to watch. And being in Germany, I think the NFL knows what they're doing. Bringing just the game of football over there will be a hit, regardless if it's a good game or not. But those are all the international games for the 2024 season. I'm excited to see a lot of them, regardless if they're good matchups or not. I think they'll all just still be a massive hit wherever they are, and hopefully it'll just grow the game even more in years to come. But that's where we'll leave it. We'll be moving on with another short break here on the show, but on the other side, we'll be talking more about the Thanksgiving games and the Black Friday games as well, plus talking about the New York Jets getting a lot of primetime games early on, and how is that a smart idea for a team that has a 40-year-old quarterback just coming off for injury. I'll dive more into that topic and into what the NFL said about their decision to do that. But for right now, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC. To access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Keeping it rolling right here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast with more of the special games, holiday edition games now in the 2024 NFL schedule. Again, there will be 3 games on Thanksgiving and another one on Black Friday this year, as after it debuted last year. Maybe the game wasn't great last year, but the NFL continues to do it into 2024. So there will be 3 games on Thanksgiving yet again, starting off with the Chicago Bears at the Detroit Lions at 12:30 on November 28th in Week 13. The first meeting of the season between these two teams, so it's not like they've already seen each other already in the past, earlier in this NFL season. So that's something to watch out for, how they're sort of heading into this matchup. Week 13, already pretty late in the season, how both of these teams are rolling into the first meeting against each other. It's a divisional game, so there's already higher stakes in the balance between both of them. And also, you have Caleb Williams against Jared Goff, number 1 pick against number 1 pick in the draft as well. And just great talent all over the place, wherever you look. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Rome Odunze, Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery. It's all going to be great. The star power is definitely not going to be lacking in the first game on Thanksgiving. And just looking back at the previous meetings, the Lions got absolutely destroyed by the Green Bay Packers last year on Thanksgiving, so they're looking to get some sort of revenge there, albeit not against the Packers, but trying to get a better image of them out there on Thanksgiving. And also, the last time they played the Chicago Bears last season, the Chicago Bears won 28-13, a pretty surprising loss there for the Lions, albeit again in Chicago and not on Thanksgiving. That one was more sort of towards the end of the season, so that had to do a little bit with it. But again, the Chicago Bears would want to have that result yet again and kind of have a statement win for themselves in Week 13 if the Lions are where I expect them to be, one of the top teams, and the Chicago Bears, maybe not one of the top teams, but if they get a win like this, it'll certainly be a very good talking point in their season as well. And just individually, looking at some of the matchups, first-round rookie receiver in Rome Odunze against former or fellow first-round cornerback Terrion Arnold for the Lions. So how those two line up against each other, I think, will be very fun. How Terrion Arnold lines up against any of their receivers, DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, I think will be very intriguing to watch. You have Aiden Hutchinson, an up-and-coming pass rusher in the NFL, trying to get to Caleb Williams. I think they have a lot of intriguing players, young, exciting players to watch out for. I think it'll be a very fun matchup. And just to start off Thanksgiving, I think It'll be a great game. Then you move on into the afternoon window. The New York Giants at the Dallas Cowboys at 4:30 p.m. The traditional Dallas Cowboys hosting a game on Thanksgiving, and also another divisional game. The last two games in 2013 between these two were pretty lopsided, not very pretty for the New York Giants. The Cowboys are 6-0 also in the last three seasons against the Giants. So the Giants obviously would love to break that streak on Thanksgiving, sort of a tradition for the Dallas Cowboys. They're America's team. They're always on Thanksgiving. Sticking it to them at their home stadium, I'm sure, would be a major win for this Giants team, but also they're dealing with a lot of uncertainties. Is Daniel Jones the guy? What do you do at receiver? It's funny because in the first season under Brian Daboll in 2022, they played on Thanksgiving and the Dallas Cowboys still won, but it was a lot closer, 28-20 in that year. So hopefully they get it to that sort of result. Maybe they get the win over the Dallas Cowboys as well, because I've been saying it for a while now. I'm not too high on the Dallas Cowboys this year. Sure, they're probably more talented and have the better team than the Giants, but I don't think there's a massive discrepancy there as we've seen over the last few years. There's some question marks on the offensive line. Defensively, how are they going to look under Mike Zimmer? They have a bunch of talent, but absorbing this new game plan, hearing a new voice in your ear, I think also takes some getting used to, but I'm sure the Dallas Cowboys will be favored, but hopefully the Giants can get something going by this time in the season and maybe surprise the Dallas Cowboys, or at least just make it a very close game. But that's the afternoon game. And then to round it off on Thursday on Thanksgiving, you have the Miami Dolphins traveling up to Wisconsin to play the Green Bay Packers at 8:20 p.m. on NBC. The last times these two teams met was in 2022, and actually on Christmas, where Green Bay came back and won against the Miami Dolphins down in Miami. It was Aaron Rodgers' last season there, so they got a pretty good win there. And on top of that, you just have two legit contenders in each of their conferences going up against each other on Thanksgiving. Tua versus Jordan Love. A lot of great receivers on either side of each of their teams. And also great offensive and just great attack-minded teams, young, hungry teams in the Miami Dolphins, in the Green Bay Packers. And that just comes from their two head coaches, very familiar with each other, Matt LaFleur and Mike McDaniel. Both worked together in their past in Houston, Atlanta, and in Washington. This is only their second meeting against each other. Green Bay was firing at this point last year, and Miami was sort of started to dwindle down at this point in the year last year. So how those two teams now sort of approach this year, can the Packers still be rolling in the second consecutive year, trying to make it to the playoffs and sort of building that momentum at the right time of the year? And also for the Dolphins, can they keep up how well they played in the earlier part of the season now towards the later half of the NFL year? That'll be something to keep in mind when they're facing off against each other. These two teams have a lot of connections with Matt LaFleur and Mike McDaniel, so that's also exciting to see how that chess match is played outside the lines of the field, how one coach reacts to the other one. They know each other very well, so I think it'll be super fascinating to see how they play off of each other. They have the teams to put on a great show, so I'm excited also to see that game. And rounding it off with Black Friday that following day on November 29th, again, still week 13 at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, the Las Vegas Raiders will travel to Arrowhead to take on the Kansas City Chiefs. This game will be shown exclusively on Amazon Prime, and it's a revenge game really for the Kansas City Chiefs. They played around this time last year, around the holiday year. Obviously, last season it was on Christmas, again, in Arrowhead, where the Las Vegas Raiders handed the Kansas City Chiefs a 20-14 loss, and it sort of kicked everything into gear, oddly enough, for the Kansas City Chiefs. Head coach Andy Reid actually referenced back to that game after they won the Super Bowl, or just later on in the year, and actually thanked Antonio Pierce for beating them up basically in that game, and sort of kickstarting their real approach to the NFL season. They won 6 consecutive games after that, and obviously went on to win the Super Bowl. in large part because of this game, sort of not taking the Raiders seriously and just getting their butts kicked in this game. It was very physical. The Chiefs seemed very uncomfortable from the starting drive, and the pressure that Las Vegas applied to Patrick Mahomes and the whole offense, it showed a lot to what Antonio Pierce sort of wants to bring to the Raiders. So I'm excited to see how he integrates that more in his full first year as the head coach of the Las Vegas Raiders. And also, you had those comments about the sort of Patrick Mahomes rules, referencing back to the Jordan rules with the Pistons back in the day. Those were Antonio Pierce's comments. The mini rivalry, back and forth, trash talking you see between Max Crosby and Patrick Mahomes. Now you add another trash talker in Christian Wilkins. I think it'll be super fun to watch between both of those. And just closer to the playoffs, how important this game is for both of them in the same division. Those playoff stakes that could be in the balance here, I think, will also add into this game being a very entertaining one. Hopefully it follows what last year's game between both of these teams did. And the Black Friday game last year, again, wasn't very close between the Jets, obviously without Aaron Rodgers, and against the Miami Dolphins, who were also just rolling. It didn't put on a great debut for Black Friday, so hopefully this year between these two teams in the AFC West should show out a little bit more for Black Friday and for this game. You have the Raiders without a quarterback, also something to keep in mind, who will be quarterbacking this team by week 13, something to also keep tabs on, but they've improved regardless of their quarterback. Brock Bowers was brought in there. You have Devontae Adams, a great defensive line with Max Crosby and Christian Wilkins. There should still be some excitement generated from this game. That'll be on Friday, and just from Thursday to Friday, I think the NFL has done great planning these games. Some divisional games, some traditional games like the Cowboys. It all wraps up into a very much anticipated holiday season slate of games that I'm looking forward to a lot. Let me know if you guys like these games, hoped it would have been somebody else, and how do they stack up in your mind to past holiday games that we've seen from the NFL. But in saying that, I will send it to the last break of the show, and when we come back, we'll talk about the New York Jets and their very heavily loaded front half of their NFL schedule, how positive it is for them, and also touching on the negatives on this sort of front-loaded schedule for the New York Jets and how it could impact their season in the second half. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back in just a few seconds. Back here now on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to go over a little bit more into the NFL schedule and really looking at the primetime games in the first half of the year. If you look at the makeup of the primetime games within the first 12 weeks of it, you'll see that the New York Jets actually have a league-high 6 primetime games to start the year. All 6 games occur in the first 11 weeks of the season, which is an NFL record. And also, their London game in Week 5 against the Minnesota Vikings will also be an exclusive broadcast. So, in totality, they have 7 exclusive broadcast games in the first 11 weeks of the NFL season. it seems like a lot. It is a lot of games early on. I can't remember a time where we've seen so many just for one team. Basically, if you think about it, throughout the first 12 weeks, 11 weeks, over half of the games you see on primetime, you're going to see Aaron Rodgers and the New York Jets on them in over half of the games. So a lot of people are going to be very accustomed to seeing and knowing a lot about the New York Jets and Aaron Rodgers with all this attention on them in the first 11 weeks. And also, something to keep in mind with this and how the New York Jets schedule is made up, the Jets will play the first 3 games on their schedule in the first 10 days of the NFL season. So to break it down a little bit more, week 1 is on a Monday on September the 9th against the San Francisco 49ers in San Francisco. And then you have week 2 against the Tennessee Titans on a Sunday on the 15th of September. So just 6 days after your first game. And then in week 3, it'll be against the New England Patriots on Thursday on September 19th, just 4 days after their week 2 game, in totality of 3 games in 10 days. It can be a positive sign for Aaron Rodgers, who obviously is coming off of that Achilles injury from last year, basically not playing a whole year, now 40 years old. It doesn't paint a good picture for Aaron Rodgers trying to stay as healthy as possible with so many games right off the bat in 2024. But the Jets have the 4th easiest schedule in 2024. So it's almost like this front-loaded schedule is sort of meant to balance out having an easy schedule by just having so many games close together. It kind of balances it out. That's the only sort of idea that I can give, the only verification I can sort of think of for why the NFL would give so many games right off the bat like this. The Jets don't have a bye week until that following week in week 12, so how they'll look physically by that point outside of their record will be very fascinating to see. Aaron Rodgers isn't shy about talking about anything he doesn't like in the NFL or just in general, so how he feels going into week 12 I think will say a lot. But the vice president of broadcasting for the NFL, Mike North, sort of provided an explanation into why the schedule sort of fell like this for the New York Jets yesterday, talking with reporters, in which he said, yes, it's an awful lot of primetime games early in the season, but obviously I feel like the Jets kind of owe us one. When we had this conversation a year ago, we were all of us all in on the Jets. For that guy to last 4 plays was disheartening for many of us. A very candid answer there from Mike North, the vice president of broadcasting for the NFL. But again, I don't know. To say that the Jets owe you one, it is kind of confusing because, it's not like the Jets wanted to get Aaron Rodgers hurt. It's not like they benefited any sort of way from Aaron Rodgers getting hurt the first 5 plays or the first 5 series of the debut with the New York Jets. And now Aaron Rodgers is 40 years old, like I mentioned before, coming off of a whole year off of football to play a lot of exclusive games and potentially, if you think about it, if they have a great record through this first half of the season, you get into the second half and the NFL does a lot of flexing, changing the schedule around. So with all of these exclusive games already in the front half of the year, if the New York Jets have a great record past week 12, I wouldn't be surprised if the NFL flexed them into more primetime games, maybe changing them onto Thursday nights, then you have one on Saturday the following week, and then maybe another one on Monday. So there could be even more exclusive night primetime games on the other half of the year. So it's not like they are totally out of the woods yet. For, again, a team that's made up of this all-in mentality, bringing guys that are meant to win right now, which is all great, but you have Tyron Smith, not really the healthiest guy, Aaron Rodgers off of a bad injury, Mike Williams, again, also coming off of a bad injury. These guys that were brought in to help the New York Jets aren't the healthiest guys, so front-loading and just overdoing this schedule on prime time, I can't imagine is a positive for these guys to have them as healthy as possible. So that's something to monitor with the NFL, and you don't usually hear such candid responses like that for NFL executives or anything like that, but I do acknowledge that it is reality for them to, get the biggest stars on all these primetime games, but it is still weird from a sense that this is probably just too much, not just from a health standpoint, but if you're an NFL fan, you don't want to see Aaron Rodgers and the New York Jets, the same team, on there or like every other week. I think there's a lot more talent that more teams want to see on primetime TV. That's just my thinking about it. Regardless if they're good or not, seeing the same team over and over again, maybe it's great if you're a Jets fan, but again, there does run that risk of Aaron Rodgers maybe getting hurt with so much traveling and so much just shifting of their routines and things like that. But it just seems a little bit contradicting. If you want the Jets to be relevant, if you want the Jets to really show their potential with Aaron Rodgers after a year of missing out on him, so you give him a lot more games early on, a ton of games in the first 10 days of the NFL season. You want the Jets to be relevant, but also you sort of increase their chances of getting hurt with some of their players being older and coming off of injuries. That doesn't really, match up there if you want the Jets to, be as healthy as possible, be relevant for the entire season. That doesn't make a lot of sense either for me. And also, again, you just run the risk of injuring Aaron Rodgers. Well, not injuring because they're not injuring him, obviously, but the potential of him getting hurt out there, just in football in general, anybody can get hurt, but he is on the older side of his career. Having the same things happen to him maybe as last year, even with the fourth easiest schedule, I sort of get the understanding there by making it a little tougher for them with all the travel and things like that. But I think it just does good for the NFL to have the Jets as healthy as possible, to really see what this team can be in 2024 after a year where we were sort of robbed of it. Of course, nobody planned it to be like that, but again, it just doesn't make too much sense for the NFL. And for Mike North, the vice president of broadcasting, to answer it like that, saying that the Jets owe them one, I don't know. It didn't really sit well with me, that sort of response there, and how it all plays out for the Jets with this all-in mentality that they're trying to ride here in 2024. If Aaron Rodgers can stay healthy, one, it'll be miraculous if he makes it through this front part of his schedule. But regardless of that, hopefully it is something that the Jets can maneuver through because there is a lot of pressure on them. Just to wrap up this segment, with Robert Saleh maybe being on the hot seat, you have Nathaniel Hackett, who I also talked about earlier in this week. Offensive coordinator-wise, doesn't really sit well. The relationship between him and Robert Saleh isn't the greatest. How they sort of maneuver through this front-loaded schedule, I think, will be very telling. If they keep their jobs, if it just blows up, will they get fired throughout the season at some point in 2024? And this whole project with the New York Jets just goes up in smoke. That's sort of worst-case scenario, but, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. We'll just have to see if, one, Aaron Rodgers stays healthy, and if he can continue that momentum, that cohesiveness with the New York Jets past Week 12 and into the most important part of the NFL season. But that just about does it on today's episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. I want to thank you guys for listening and tuning into today's show. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Make sure to check out all the social media platforms on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok for more of the network's content. And also, if you want to see more of me and this show, check out the GSMC Sports Network channel and the GSMC Podcast Network channel on YouTube, where YouTube shorts are posted every weekday. The full live shows are recorded and posted on there as well, and individual segment videos. If you don't have time to watch an entire show, you can tune in and check out individual segments that intrigue you the most. As a reminder, these episodes go live every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Tune in to more NFL and football conversations with me, Manny Maradiegue, as your host. Thank you guys again for joining me. I hope you guys all have a great weekend, and I'll see you guys all back here again on Monday.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn ain't